I'm the acting chair of the board this evening. We will work from a prepared agenda. All full voting board members are present, but we'll do a roll call for starters, if I could, please, to my left.
Bob Hayes.
Bilal Hussein.
Riley Bergeron.
Ed Barra.
Maureen Hopkins.
Tim DeRoche.
Andrea Westby.
Thank you. First item of business is the acceptance of the minutes of December 9, 2025. Board members had an opportunity to review the minutes. Do we have any motions or proposed changes to the minutes? Entertain a motion.
I move to accept the minutes.
Second.
Belil moved to accept. Maureen seconded. All in favor? Opposed? Unanimous. We can continue with the agenda as prepared, although the first applicant just walked through the door. Are you prepared to proceed at this point? Okay. Very good. The next item on our agenda is a public hearing, site plan review, subdivision review, 15 Academy Street, application by Goral Palmer on behalf of the town of Auburn Town Center Apartments LLC for final approval. The construction of a 53-unit residential development. This property is located in the traditional downtown neighborhood T-4.2 district and will be reviewed under Chapter 60, Article 16, Division 2, Site Plan Review, and Division 4, Subdivision. This has been noticed as a public hearing, as I understand it, staff?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Very good. The way that we proceed when we review applications is to have a brief overview from staff with any questions that board members may have of staff, then an applicant to more fully present the application to us, again with questions or comments from staff, and then it will be open for the public. So at this point, I'd ask for any staff review of this application.
Thank you. So this was an item that was continued from the December 9th meeting, and at that meeting, the board granted preliminary approval with a few conditions, and a few of those were in regards to the off-street parking arrangement, site distance, and then the building width waiver, which the board should act on tonight. It's a public hearing. So typically public hearings are voting meetings unless there's an agreed upon timeline by the board and the applicant if there are more things that need to be submitted. But based on the applicant's correspondence with the police department, it seems like the department has no other needs in regards to the off-street parking arrangement and site distance. So the one item that is still needing to be addressed by the board is the waiver from building width. You'll notice in the memo, the motion includes the standards for building width and front setback as well, and building frontages. They're just requesting the waiver from building width. So the current standard is that you have a maximum of 110 feet width for buildings in the form-based code, and I believe they're proposing around 270 feet, but they're proposing to break up the building in terms of like landscaping and building facade undulation. So that's how they're proposing to display the building so that it is sort of broken up. So.
That's it. Anyone on the board have any? Yes, Eric.
I just want to note for the record, we have one board member here that was not here for the preliminary meeting, Andrea Westby, and I think she would like to just explain what she's done to prepare so she can act as a full member tonight.
Fair enough. Thank you very much for the reminder. Andrea, have you had a chance to review this application and the video?
Yes, I've reviewed the submitted materials, and I did review the video of last month's board meeting.
Do you feel that you're prepared to act on this?
I do.
Thank you. Any board member have any questions for staff regarding this final subdivision and site plan review? Maureen?
Yes, I don't have it right in front of me. Could you point me to the section of the zoning code that addresses the criteria for a waiver?
There's two sections. One refers to the other. Waiver requests within the form-based code are under section 60-558C, waiver requests.
Thank you.
And then that refers you back to the objectives of site plan review as the criteria that are used in measuring the request.
While Maureen looks at that, are there any other board members with questions regarding this application? Khalil? Hello.
Yeah, so reviewing the emails with the police department in regards to the on-street parking. So what was the final determination? Was it the fact that the applicant can't move forward with getting rid of parking spaces, or is it not a determination yet for the city to do?
I think it was, in the email, the department said had no additional needs. I believe there was space for parking on Main Street striping at some point that was taken away. But their response was that, they would defer to the city if there were any changes, but at this point, they said that it was fine to proceed.
Okay, so I guess my question was, will they move forward with taking off-street parking for the development, or will they not do it?
I think summer. There was a road repaving project that happened this summer. So when we first started talking with this applicant, there was on-street parking striped in that area. That was in question. DOT's road project that happened this summer changed the configuration of the striping, and there is not currently parking striped in the area that was in question. We are talking to the state about why some of those changes were made, and we may look at bringing back parking, but we wouldn't be able to bring back parking in that section because it would create a site distance issue. I don't know what the outcome of that will be, whether or not some on-street parking will be brought back along Main Street, but currently there is no on-street parking striped in the spot that was a concern.
Well, I had a similar question, because if I understood the application materials, a vehicle parked along Main Street would obstruct the view of someone leaving this project and accessing Main Street. And as I understand it, right now, there's no prohibition on parking on Main Street. So I'll start with that. Is there any prohibition on parking on Main Street?
I don't believe that there's parking prohibited signs, but that's something that the board could certainly require as part of a review. There's just no parking spaces striped on that section of Main Street, and the shoulder's not wide enough to be a legal parking space. Not to say that somebody might not try to park there, so signage may be a good option.
Well, if the shoulder's not wide enough for parking, then is it fair to say that we could expect the city to take steps to prohibit parking along the street, or because that seems to be an open question to me, and I think we're being asked to approve a project where, at least my understanding of the application is that there's an obstruction to a viewing to the left as you leave this project, and the city police department, again, as I understand the email exchanges, is saying, well, we don't really have an opinion, and if anything's going to change, it's going to come from city administration. So I guess, where does that leave us as a board? Because, well, parking's not prohibited, what I'm hearing you say, and I appreciate knowing this now, that it's inadequate for parking, so I'd have to assume that it won't be allowed, but is that a reasonable assumption?
Yeah, the way that I read that email exchange was that the administration would have to decide if they wanted to bring back parking in that area. But I do think it's possible for somebody to park there, even though the shoulder's not wide enough, and maybe no parking signs. I would say that would be a responsibility of the applicant if this project is driving the need, a safety concern for that. But that could be a condition of the board.
I guess what would the condition be? The applicant can't force the city to make a change to the parking arrangement. So barring some action by an entity outside of the applicant's control, how can we make it a condition that the applicant abides by?
I think that if there's a concern that somebody will park there, even though the shoulder is not wide enough, and that it does create a sight distance issue for somebody pulling out of this driveway, the board could require an off-site improvement that they work with the city engineer to make it clear that there's no parking in that area. But we'd have to work with the city engineer and Public Works on that.
I would hate to think that the project wouldn't go forward because of what I view as kind of a minor issue, but I'm not clear on what it means to work with the city engineer, or if the city engineer and the applicant don't come to an agreement that prohibits parking, because that would be the only way to obviate the existing deficiency, which, as I understand it, is when you look left, you can't see beyond the parked vehicle or through the parked vehicle. Maybe the applicant has something to say about that. Any other questions for staff? Seeing none, would the applicant like to make any presentation?
Sure. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, my name is Caleb Barassa with Goral Palmer. I've been before you a few times at this point, and then last was December 9th. So I have, again, up with me a handful of slides, includes some of my site plans if there's any specific questions to go back to in that regard. But ultimately, the final items for discussion were basically the parking on street item to discuss, and then the building waivers. And I can't recall if there was something else there. I know, Sam, there was a clarification that we're only looking for the building width waiver. If you go to the next slide, I think there was really only a couple others to touch on there. So those clarifications, and then the offsite parking, I think was still listed in the staff memo. But I believe that was handled right prior to that December 9th meeting. So we had provided with you all in our last iteration stuff to go along with the off-site parking, that we're meeting those additional 15 spaces there. So I think to go into the off-site or the site distance issue at the driveway, I think from a base level, my understanding of it was that it was, one, a temporary issue if there's somebody that's parking on street. I'm understanding that with the restriping that was done along the road, that it's kind of in question if there could be or is allowed any on-street parking. And then, as you've seen in the emails with the city police department, there was kind of a somewhat of an acknowledgement, but that, yeah, somebody else would have to kind of make the decision in the administration level as to, do we want to actually deregulate, on-street parking there? From my perspective, just from the engineering point of view and the safety point of view, there are driveways all along Main Street. So this is not a new condition. And the location of this very driveway is the exact location, if not slightly shifted off center by maybe a foot or two of where the current driveway is. Now, actually, if you go, Sam, to the next, go one more. I think I have an aerial view. Hard to tell in this, but, and if you zoom in, it might be a little bit more pixelated, but just to the top of the page to the north of our driveway is another driveway. So it's not as if this is a situation where right directly next to our driveway would be another on-street parking space or a car ultimately parked there. I think it's, if anything, a slight conflict that was notified, and if anything, that might also have to conflict with maybe the Elm Street intersection there too. But if you're utilizing, just to take a step back, when you do the site distance calculations or that measurement, I should say, it's taken 10 feet back from the edge of the travelway, puts you into the driveway beyond what the actual shoulder would be, and then it's measured 3.5 feet off of the ground. And so when you're doing that, it can be understandable that, yes, there might be a conflict in that sense, but no different than if you're pulling out of a driveway and there's a car there, or maybe there's some vegetation that's starting to kind of encroach into that line of sight. You're going to use what you have for space to start to pull forward a little bit, which would be no different than a lot of these driveways on Main Street too. So I think that just from just thinking about it a little bit more at the base level, how I view this from the engineering point of view and where the safety comes into that, I don't think that this is necessarily an unsafe condition. It's an existing condition. And to the point of, should the board direct us or staff to pursue removing any doubt that there could be on-street parking there? From the beginning, I think we're certainly open to, you know, whatever option there could be there. I don't necessarily view it as really as an issue at that base level. So I would like to say that, you know, in our opinion, there really shouldn't be any action taken, but wanted to at least kind of explain that much as to how I'm viewing that too, for the board's consideration, and can discuss further with, you know, with staff here too, as to what that, you know, that course of action should be if there was to be one. But I think that it's a scenario where it's notified, it's been acknowledged, we've talked it through, but I don't think that any action really should be taken on that item. Other than that, I figure we might just talk through that item a little bit, and then happy to talk about the waiver item too, if the board would like.
I did have one question for you that isn't a waiver item, and it's not about the access issue. The staff report says that under access will be from Main Street via a shared driveway and parking area with existing townhouses at Main Street and Academy. Necessary easements and agreements for site reconfiguration have been negotiated. Final easements will be executed upon site and subdivision approval. So have you reached a final agreement with whoever needs to provide you with this access easement?
So we have the drafts of those documents prepared, but wanted to just make sure that, again, it takes a lot of time to write up those documents, because they also pertain to full descriptions of, you know, meets and bounds of the actual limits of the easement areas. So we have those drafted up with exhibits based on plans that we've prepared, but we didn't want to execute and record those if the board had perhaps a comment on maybe the parking configuration or something that would just affect those access easements. So we didn't want to do that just because it would be a little bit of an iterative process. Obviously, it takes a lot of time and then resources just to do that twice. So the drafts have been prepared and I believe provided, and hoping that the board had reviewed that and found that to be acceptable.
Well, won't those easements need to be shown on a plan, and doesn't this board need to approve the plan?
Correct. Those are shown on the subdivision plan as well.
Well, if they're shown on the plan, have they been agreed to by the other party?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. And that's what I mean to say. I think I probably gloss over when I say draft. All of those individual owners, because there actually isn't like an association board with that. So the applicant actually has met with each of the individual owners for all those townhouses and come to agreements on those. So, but it was agreed upon that we'll wait to execute them just until after we get our approvals from you folks.
Thank you.
I have a question, Ed, for the
Yes.
applicant. Mr. Barassa, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Could you take a moment and point out to me and whoever else might be watching on that diagram, the driveway that you're speaking of? The access point? Can you go up there
Yes.
and point out that access point, please? All right, and the easement parking area is the box with the dotted line, correct?
Correct. Yep.
All right, staff, do you have an overlay or something that doesn't show the vegetation as well, where we can have a better view of that existing driveway?
Yeah, the site plan should be in there.
A site plan and GPS overlay or something? So
Yep,
that's the site plan.
correct.
What variations does the site plan, I've seen so many things here, I'm having a hard time finding exactly the answer I want. The site plan that I'm looking at, how and where does that differ from the existing driveway entrance?
Correct. Sam, if you could just go back one more slide, just between the existing conditions and this plan. So, without being able to really scale this off. So you have your existing limits here, and just by looking by eye, if you go to the next sheet. Now that I'm actually looking at this here, perhaps closer to 8 to 10 feet, perhaps offset from what we have here.
Has the width increased, decreased, or stayed the same?
The width should be the same. It's 24 feet.
So 24-foot entrance, which is pre-existing, and it's shifted about 10 feet. Is that accurate?
Correct. Southerly. Yep.
Southerly. Thank you.
Yep. Which in turn would probably help to alleviate, the issues. Perhaps if the site distance that was recorded might have been a little bit different. Yep.
You answered what I needed. Thank you.
Yep.
Maybe just as a follow-up, with that offset now in the increased distance from the other driveway that you speak of, would that allow a vehicle to park between those two driveways?
It should not. It should not, no. What you see here, hard to see the dashed line, but I would assume that comes down, almost lines up with the property line. Their curb cut actually extends to basically the end of our sidewalk there. So you have less than a parking stall to be able to fit into that without encroaching into the radius for both of those driveways.
So although the site plan shows parking parallel to the street, you're saying that nobody could park on the street in that same?
Yes, correct. And I think what I'll just note is that, again, we're talking about, there was some DOT work that, was undertaken here recently. So this survey obviously predates the DOT work, so.
Any other questions for the applicant? Anything further? Did you want to talk about the waivers?
Yes, would love to talk a little bit more about the waivers. I think I could certainly just reiterate, Sam, if you would go to the rendering that we had in there. So just to go back what we had talked about, going back to our October submission, we had originally submitted and we're anticipating requesting, I think, four waivers. We had 1, 2, 3, I believe 4 waivers, and we worked with staff, got that down to just the one. So there was a setback issue we had. There was some amount of open facade that didn't have openings or windows within it. So a number of those items that we've since revised the architectural and the civil plans and have worked on that to just avoid any such waivers. So now back to the final element, which is the standard in the form-based code for the building width requirement. Now this lot, as we've mentioned, is not a standard lot in this traditional neighborhood district. And so it's probably one of the largest lots in the district, which makes it kind of unique. And I think that the form-based code, as you start to read through it, this lot might not fall into that mold. And I think one example I would say would be that there's, as that standard is written out, it says the maximum would be 110 feet or 60% of the lot. And if you take 60% of the lot, it would be greater than the 110 feet. So there's a little bit of back and forth just with the sheer frontage that we have across the lot. Now, when you talk about how do we take that and view the form-based code and try to come up with a design that really meets the intent of the form-based code. I think that this rendering really does a lot of justice to what we're really trying to do here, which is the intent being forming and keeping a street wall here that is a walkable, kind of livable neighborhood. So within all of these, although this is a multifamily building, all of these ground floor units have their own access directly onto the street. They have stoops that are all kind of written in, following how the code kind of follows there. So you have all of these kind of openings into it. You have several of the stair towers as well, and then some pedestrian paths just for the residents and guests on each end of the building. Then you talk about the vertical and horizontal elements of the building as well. So obviously there's a lot of grade on Academy Street as you trend down the hillside here. So there's effectively 8 steps in the building foundation that start to break up vertically this building here too, and kind of start to match what you would see as you're kind of going along on some of these other streets in the downtown. Then on the horizontal plane of the building, with all of these units here, there's a step or a break in that horizontal face about every 10 to 12 feet. I think it's a little bit longer, perhaps on the very ends of the building, but a lot of breakup, a lot of architectural functions in this building that I think really we're really looking, we've read it very thoroughly, and we're trying to meet the intent of what this traditional neighborhood wants to be in this feel that really can be very kind of fluid for people walking in and out of the building. So various access points, as I mentioned, with 3, I believe, stair towers that are shown in the brick. So folks can walk in through any point on one of those or ends of the buildings. There's a double loaded corridor inside as well, so someone could enter from each end and get around through here. So I think we're trying to maintain this fluidity, easy access for folks using it. And then I think just the vertical and horizontal elements, as I mentioned here too, I think that really kind of speaks to how the intent of the code really was to be. So that was what I wanted to just reiterate, what our thoughts were. We didn't really talk much in the last meeting about it, but wanted to mention as much, and then really from there just wanted to have the discussion with the board, and if there was any other questions, anything that we might be able to answer or provide for you. Thank you.
So normally, I don't believe anyway, we would have much to say about the facade of the building in terms of the different textures that you're proposing to use. But since your waiver request seems highly dependent on the design that you're showing us, and the different colors help to break up the building, what assurance do we have that when you build the building, it's going to look like that?
Correct. And I know we talked about this. That was actually one of the, I think one of the public comments from perhaps the December, or was it the November meeting that we had? Yeah. So this is fairly well set in stone at this point. So there are no, we're intending that everything that we're showing here to you folks for materials and colors in here, that is going to be what it is. So if there were to be changes, that would be something that we would have to come back to the planning board to review.
Thank you. Any other questions of the applicant? Yes.
Just one quick question. You said that the lot, it would be more than 110 feet if it were 60% of the lot line. What would that distance be?
I believe I have that number. The number was 180 feet if we were to do 60% of the lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
At this point, we will move to our public hearing on a motion to do so. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Seconded.
Moved and seconded. The public hearing will be open. We don't go in any particular order, pro or con. So feel free to approach the podium. Our rules do limit your comments to 5 minutes. And I guess I'm the one who keeps track of that. So Public hearing is open.
Good evening, my name is John Cleveland. I live at 183 Davis Avenue in Auburn. I rise to speak to one item that's in the subdivision, the site plan review requirements, a mandatory requirement that I think is important. And that specifically deals with the requirement that the applicant submit evidence or submit documents that show their financial capacity and their technical capacity to undertake the project. Reviewing this, I think you will recall, we're talking about a project here that's in excess of $10 million. This is a large project. I've gone through it. I've only been able to find one letter, and there's hundreds of pages in here, so if I may have missed it, I'll stand corrected, but I'll go by what I know is in the application. And this is from Maine Community Bank. This is a letter dated November the 5th, 2023. That's more than 2 years ago. And in that letter, what it essentially says is that Mr. Leonard and Dr. Cece's are customers of Maine Community Bank, and they have commercial accounts at Maine Community Bank there, and they've been customers for a period of time. The letter doesn't say anything about their financial capacity to undertake a project of this kind. Simply being a customer and making your payments as they're required doesn't necessarily mean you have the total capacity. The letter also does not say that the bank is committed to providing capital for this project at all. So we don't know whether or not they can or cannot do it. And of course, it's a 2-year-old project. Secondly, it says nothing about the capacities of those two gentlemen or the LLC that is the applicant here. Whether they built a project of this nature, what their success has been in the past, what they bring for their skills in doing and undertaking and successfully completing a project of this scale and magnitude. So I would suggest, number one, that you think whether or not this actually meets the requirement as required under the ordinance to show financial capacity and their technical ability to do it. Second point, this approval is only for this applicant. I would say that the board should make it very clear on this applicant that it is, if anyone, any other entity other than this applicant chooses to do this application or do this project, that they should have to come back and show their financial capacity and technical capacity to meet all of the requirements that you've talked about here. So I would leave those 2 points with you and wish you would consider them before you take any final action.
Thank you, Mr. Cleveland.
My name is Ron Russell. I have the property that adjoins on Elm Street. The back of our house faces the parking lot. We've lived there for 50 years, my wife and I, and we've watched the general growth of the neighborhood. It's been a historic area. I know the problems that we've seen in the last probably 6 months to a year with traffic. It's gotten to the point where it's backed up. I notice on this particular property, they have an exit on Main Street where there's a lot of backup traffic. It's a little bit dangerous. We've had accidents in our block for a number of years. They finally got one section of it with some signs, but the main traffic that comes down Elm Street and makes a left. There's quite a bit. It backs up. The property that you have are looking at is going to be facing a lot of traffic. Is going to go to the north. There's 24,000 cars a day that run up and down to Turner, and of course on the other direction, there's all the traffic that at the light. I'm sure there's not a chance of putting in another traffic light there. So the traffic is a real issue. Another thing is the parking, which we've been talking about. I just don't think that the area supports that much parking and that much activity. They have a reason for the 110-foot limitation for that size property. They're trying to shoehorn something in here that's just too much for the area. Too many people, and of course, the property itself, we've got no guarantees that it's going to look like that. You know, it can morph into a real abortion, if I can use that word. My wife and I have both been against any development like that. It just monopolizes the street. It's not, it just doesn't fit. The reason that they put a 110-foot limitation that you're trying to, that they're trying to have you approve 217 feet, is it's there for a reason. And before you approve that kind of a change and an exception to this, I think you ought to think, clearly on this, because this building will be around forever, and it doesn't necessarily have to look like this. I've canvassed a little bit of the neighborhood prior to this. We didn't have a lot of warning. We only had a couple of months before when we found out about this project. My wife and I, and I've approached a couple of neighbors, and I can tell you that they're generally opposed. I would like to have more time to be able to canvass the neighborhood. I haven't been busy the last 3 weeks. My wife has passed away yesterday. So I would like you to go ahead and seriously consider thinking about this, because it's going to affect the downtown for quite a while. And I'm happy to see that there's some new faces here, because I'm a little bit concerned about the way this project was brought up and how it came approved by the last administration. The property values, I'm under the impression the city paid over $100,000. I was asking about purchasing this to keep it, empty from the telephone company. It was over $100,000. My understanding is that the city let this go for less than that, maybe $50,000. If it was $50,000, I would have bought it and kept it as it is, keeping the historic neighborhood in the current condition. Thank you.
Thank you.
Evan Sear, 122 Granite Street. Before I begin, I would ask the chair for permission to provide a document to members of the planning board. It is a non-substantive document, not an opinion document. It simply consists of excerpts of the code, which are publicly available, such that I wouldn't be entering something to the planning board members that members of the public wouldn't also have access to. There's just sections of the ordinance that are pertinent to what I'm going to say. I thought it'd be easier to give you those sections rather than to ask you to flip through while I'm speaking.
I think that that's fine. I understand what you're going to hand us is simply sections of the ordinance that you want to address.
Sections of the, I should add, also the deed, which is also included in the application.
I don't have a problem with that, but I'm going to ask the board if objections. Does the applicant have whatever you're about to submit?
There are additional copies in the back, and absolutely we'll make sure the applicant has a copy of it. It's, again...
I'd like him to have one before
Yep.
you start.
Like, so I'll preface my comments, again, Evan Sear, 122 Granite Street. I'll preface my comments by stating that I'm neither for nor against the project. I've sat on the planning board. I understand that there can be tough decisions to make, and one of the very incredibly difficult parts about the decisions is the amount of information that you have, and sometimes the information that you don't have. And as I've been following this, I found some information that I felt pertinent that had I been sitting on the planning board, I would have wanted to know. And I can say that nothing that I'm going to say right now precludes any decision of the board or would push the board towards approval, denial, or tabling. It's just simply information that I think I would have wanted to know had I been sitting in your seat. The first is that the application is being reviewed as a site plan review and subdivision, but section 60-556 under form-based code plans indicates that there are some projects in the form-based code zone that should also undergo a special exception. One of the criteria being more than 12,000 square feet of new building. This obviously meets that one. And also that any project located within the form-based code district area that seeks a waiver from the adopted form-based code regulating development standards shall submit a complete special exception and site plan review application for planning board review and action. And I say that only because I understand that one of the planning board's jobs is to indicate whether or not they believe an application is complete before they take action. And understanding and deciding whether the planning board members believe all parts are there as part of that. And again, providing this doesn't say one way or the other what happens, but there is that requirement. The second, and this speaks to the deed that I put in, if you've been following, the previous deed actually had a restriction which said that the applicant was not allowed to ask for waivers at all. That has been amended. You'll see the newest deed here, which removed that, which I think was probably smart on the part of the city to remove such a deed restriction. But there is sort of an odd piece left in, and it's on page 1, 2, 3. Title number 1. It's restrictions on the deed, and it's one project. The grantee shall construct a residential housing development consisting of a minimum of 16 market rate apartments with common space, green space, and adequate parking on the property to be known as Auburn Town Center Apartments, the project. I include it only because I haven't seen it sort of highlighted. I think that the board can absolutely determine whether or not they believe that's in their purview to care whether that's there. I think the board can determine what they think adequate parking means. It's a fairly open-ended word. I bring it up only because there are some findings of fact that the board will utilize, one of them being section 60-1304, section 2 describing a written denial. Not that I'm saying there'd be denial, but in the past, anything that was written as a condition of denial was generally also used as a condition of approval to say that those conditions did not exist, so we could approve. So I'm not using that as a denial thing. I just want to be clear. But it says the proposed development, one reason to deny might be that the proposed development violates provisions of the zoning regulations applicable to the site or other applicable laws, regulations, or ordinances. And section 60-1365, and these are all under the special exception subdivision rules that you're looking at. One of the findings is that a subdivision plan shall conform to the comprehensive plan. Any proposed subdivision shall be in conformity with the comprehensive plan of the city and with the provisions of all pertinent state and local codes and ordinances. And again, I don't bring this up to say that there's an obvious conclusion, just to say that had I been on the planning board, I would have wanted the information with regard to the deed.
Evan, you are approaching 9 minutes.
I am approaching 9 minutes. All right. Well, I apologize. I've clearly taken more time than allotted. You've got the pertinent ordinances. I'll wrap it up by saying There's a conflict in the ordinance with regard to how far away off-site parking can be. And so it's well within the planning board's purview to discuss which standards should be used, and there are ordinances that also describe what to do when there's a conflict, and it would be well within the planning board's purview to do that. And with regard to waivers, it sounds as though some changes to the plans have been made that no longer require a waiver for the 10-foot uninterrupted wall, but the plans that were provided to the public at least don't indicate a change. So that may be worth discussing, but I'm sure it may be possible that the planning board has plans that are different than what were provided. That does happen from time to time. And also, there is a provision that requires residential properties to have a ground floor elevation 2 feet above the sidewalk or the front yard, which again, doesn't seem to be the case on the elevations, but it not necessarily means that that's not the case. It's just a discussion point that hasn't been brought up. And I will close by saying thank you for allowing me to go over my time.
Thank you.
And as I said, none of this is meant to be a argument for or against in any particular direction, just to say there were some things that when I was looking at this, I said, wow, if I was on the board, I wish that would have been involved in the staff report, just so that when we make our final decision, I could have said I had all the information that I wanted. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
My name is Annette Lozier. I've lived at 16 Elm Street, and it's right next to Ron's house. And I've lived there in that apartment house for 41 years. And I just don't understand I think when you were talking about the parking on that street.
Ms. Lozier, would you address the board, and then if there are questions, we'll direct them to the...
Well, what I'm saying is, when he talked about the parking on the street on Academy, nobody does that because it's so narrow and you've got so much traffic moving back and forth. And I've seen the community theater, and they don't have people parking there. They have them parking along High Street. But they don't have people, either one, on either side of Academy with people parking, you know? So it's I can't see that happening because you got so many lanes and the light at the bottom of the hill, it's just not gonna work. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other person wishing to speak?
Hi, my name is Jeanette Tremblay, and I live on Elm Street. When they first started talking about that, I thought, oh, yeah, that'd be great. I wasn't even thinking of all the parking, and now it just doesn't make sense. I look out my kitchen window, and Academy Street is bumper-to-bumper traffic all the time. And then they get fed up with not being able to turn on Academy Street, so they go down Maine and they come up Elm. So Elm Street has become so busy that at times you can't even get out of your own driveway. So I don't know how this is going to work out. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me. There's no place to park. No, that's about all I have to say. I just don't agree with it at all. Thank you.
Going once, twice, 3 times. Accept the motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Second?
Moved by Bob, seconded by Maureen. All in favor? Thank you. Would staff or the applicant care to address any concerns that the board may have regarding these comments? Would it be preferable that one or the other, or do you want me to let whoever wants to answer the questions can answer?
I think we can answer whatever's best, the applicant or staff, on any of the questions.
Tim?
If I remember correctly, and I know there's been some revisions, but if I remember correctly, back in November when we first saw this, the artist rendition showing Academy Street with cars parked in front of it, we were made to understand that that was an artist rendition and not an expectation that that would be used for parking. Has that changed, or am I remembering incorrectly?
So the on-street parking is not, we do not depend on that. It was depicted as a potential public improvement that could be sought with the city, but nothing that our plan necessarily depends on. So there was a kind of a descriptive element or illustrative element to that plan as well.
Yeah, I'm asking on the benefit of the people who brought it up, because the artist rendition does show cars parked on Academy Street, but the parking lot behind your proposal is suitable, except for some, for everyone to park there, but Academy Street is not considered part of the parking for this project. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Yes. And just further, all of the on-site parking that is provided meets what is required for residents. So the additional spaces that we have sought and have acquired rights to at the Village Inn parcels are really for the benefit of guest parking.
Thank you.
Yep.
I would ask about the letters regarding financial capacity. I thought we had received some revised letters. I know that we did at our last meeting from some applications. I thought this was one of them. Am I mistaken?
Yes, we had provided an additional letter. I don't have that with my materials here, and I'm not sure if staff might be able to review, but we had provided an additional letter, and it seemed to be that we were in agreement that that was sufficient for what the board might need. Now, it is hard to say that there is, typically when you go through the process to get a construction loan, you don't have the permits right prior to that. They want to know, the bank wants to know that you have a project that's permitted by the city. And so the applicant has started that process and basically is right up to starting to order appraisals and go through that element there. But obviously that's nothing that gets provided with our materials here, but they've been working with Maine Community Bank and had that established relationship, certainly. So, and have begun that process.
We do see paperwork across our packets from lending institutions very clearly saying this applicant has the financial capacity for this project. Those letters do exist.
Correct, for the means to overcome. But obviously it's not I think what I was more trying to say was that it's not a letter that says we will provide funding, because sometimes that can be two different things. That sometimes the banks don't want to overextend themselves in those letters as well. So,
and I think we understand that, and I think Tim's point is a good one. We don't expect you to come here with a commitment letter.
Yep, certainly.
But we do expect that the applicant will demonstrate his or her or its financial capacity, meaning that they either have the funds or have access to those funds. So regardless of whether they have a commitment letter or not, they should have enough of a relationship with a third party, whether it's a lender or whomever, that they can either access funds or have those funds.
Yep, certainly.
So that's, and I'm saying that generally, so that in the future we'll see that in our application packages, because we've gotten a slew of letters recently that really were
Right.
not worth the paper they were
Sure.
written on.
Along those same lines, could you speak to the applicant's past projects and their technical capacity to complete this? Have they built buildings of the same scale before?
I can't speak to, but I can speak to the team that's been assembled, which obviously includes us as the civil engineer, licensed architects, structural engineers, electrical engineers to put together this building, accredited professionals certainly, and going down through the contracting team as well. So there's a team in place that has already set up most of that to be able to provide and deliver this project.
Actually, my question's for staff regarding the updated facade plans. Like Mr. Sear indicated, is the new plans facade been properly publicly noticed?
It has been in the last packet that the board had. We've sent public notices to all abutters within 500 feet, as well as advertised in the Sun Journal, and it's been available on the website. So, yeah, I think
This facade change is included in that? Okay.
Yes, correct. Yep.
Thank you.
Yep, doesn't show in this rendering. We didn't have time to update the rendering, but further in my slides here, I have the elevations that have been updated. Those were provided in advance of the December meeting.
That raises the question in my mind then, is what I'm looking at now not what you're proposing, but yet there's another rendering in the package that is your final proposed?
The rendering is more of an illustrative plan for the board's benefit to visualize, but we have actual architectural stamped floor plans and elevations that have been revised, and the only difference was the addition of 1 or 2 windows on the very end of the building. All else stays the same, and I think just to reiterate too, was, I know that was just a comment that we had heard. There's no intention to change anything for the siding materials and colors, and so we're understanding that if there were to be any changes, we would have to come back before you all to get those approved.
And I think if I were to vote to approve this project, it would be with that as a condition.
Certainly.
Because you're offering it.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that we could unilaterally impose that, but you have offered it, and so I'm going to, if we get to that point, make that a condition. Is there a plan that I can refer to if I make that a condition? Does that plan have a name, for example?
I would say with maybe perhaps the submitted architectural plans. Just with the submitted architectural plans. I don't have the actual names or titles of those sheets individually, okay, but on the on-file plans.
I do have a question, if I might, for staff. Mr. Cleveland asked raised the issue of transferability of permits. Those weren't the words he used, but I think that's what I understand he's asking about, whether it's this applicant or any other applicant, and we grant approval, and we're talking about technical capacity and financial capacity now, but if that applicant were to peddle those permits to a third party, is there any review required by the city in order for that to happen, so that we know that that party has the financial capacity to carry out the project?
I don't believe there's any required review. I think the way I understand it is that if a new person if the property were to be sold, that new person would have to come back to demonstrate financial capacity.
To who?
To the planning board.
All right.
Right. I think if that's a concern, then it would be good to make that clear in the approval. Oftentimes, it doesn't have to come back if there's somebody else building, but I think if that's a concern with this project, you could make it a condition of approval.
Thank you.
Could you address Mr. Sear's point about the ground story finished floor elevation? Is it a minimum of 2 feet?
The short answer is yes, they are. And each individual step in the building is a minimum of 2 feet above the sidewalk elevation. Yes.
Thank you. And would staff be able to address whether or not they believe that this should have been reviewed as a special exception?
I'm just looking at that section. I know that so far it has been reviewed as a site plan and subdivision, and I'm looking at the discretionary type plans listing. Subdivisions is one type of discretionary plan. There's also a trigger for buildings over 12,000 square feet. And I think we had determined this one to be a subdivision plan. I guess there's a question, I guess, whether or not we should also apply the special exception standards. We categorized it as a site plan and subdivision as that subdivision discretionary plan type. I think you could argue either way.
Is it fair to say that the project's greater than 12,000 square feet?
Yes, it is.
Yes. Good. Eric, you say that we might be able to look at it either way. It seems like it says special exception and site plan review, so how would we look at it any other way other than and?
We're also doing subdivision, so yeah, I think you could apply the special exception standard as well, and I acknowledge that that has not been the case so far.
Where would that leave us procedurally? Obviously, we could continue our current review while a special exception application is submitted. don't think they're terribly involved applications, are they?
It's not a lot of additional information as compared to what you already have. It's another review of the special exception standards to explain how they believe the project meets it. So yeah, you could ask for that and postpone an action on the application and ask for that additional information.
Bob, you get your trigger finger there?
I guess the only thought was, are there some standards that are obvious that we are special exception standards that we'd obviously need to look at that are different from the review we've already had?
So there's a lot of overlap between the standards, but
It's a lot of similar conclusions to site plan. I can pull up the section. So those are the conditions for special exception.
What section is that?
It's section 60, 1336.
In my humble opinion, even though there may be significant overlap, we can probably say that about most of our individual review sections, whether it's site plan and subdivision or special exception. I think if the ordinance calls for a special exception approval, then I think we have to have an application that we can review and approve. And so that's my view of it. I'm prepared to be convinced otherwise.
yeah, I think you'd want to be very specific on your findings too for that special exception review, and we don't have a draft set of those prepared currently.
Okay with that?
Yes.
Any other questions for the applicant or staff arising from the public comments that we've heard? I will say that with respect to Mr. Sears' comment about the deed restriction, I'm comfortable that although the restriction in the deed says that property shall be developed with adequate parking on the property, I think the ordinance provides for off-site parking, so I don't think that this deed prohibits the use of off-street parking to meet that standard. And did someone ask the question about the renderings and whether there's Mr. Sear had raised a question about an elevation of 2 feet?
Yes, correct.
That is something that is, I think a lot of the board members, we had our package of materials from November and December, and we were given a smaller package at this meeting and breathed a sigh of relief and came to the meeting with that package. And so we don't have all of the materials in front of us tonight that we would have had in November, like that. No, you can keep it.
Yes, I would agree, Mr. Chairman. I believe that in our original submission for October, I think we had provided like a line by line of the form-based code requirements. So probably that would be like the only written kind of evidence that we've provided potentially to kind of go along with that. But just a check of the grading plans that are provided too would just show that we've certainly met that. I do recall reviewing that personally, so.
Well, if there are no further questions. Yes.
So I have a question. The materials that Mr. Seer had given, the deed or the newer updated deed. So is it safe to assume that the section regarding the that this housing development consisting of a minimum of 16 market rate apartments? Is the plan for these to be fully all market rate as well?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Just as a side note, I took the liberty of looking at the original packet that she happened to have with her, and Mr. Seer brings up a valid point. The deed in our original packet is dated March 20. The deed Mr. Seer provided is dated November 3rd. It'd be really, I think it's, the board should be aware of deed changes, and if there are updates, changes, provisions, revisions, whatever, to a quitclaim deed, we should know about it, especially through the procedure of either denying or approving something. The fact that there was a deed change that wasn't brought to our attention, that's I can see Mr. Seer's point with that.
Yeah, it should have been in your packet, but I can double check to see if it is in the online packet.
Yes, I believe that was resubmitted prior to the December meeting as well.
It absolutely should be part of your packet, though. Agreed. That's agreed.
All right. What's the board's pleasure?
I'd like to say I appreciate going from reducing the number of waivers being sought. And I would be comfortable with granting the waiver they're asking for. The one question I have is whether or not we should review it under special exception. That'd be my only pause.
I think the language of the ordinance is pretty specific in that any proposal of 12,000 square feet or more of new construction should be reviewed as a special exception and a site plan. So I think it would be in everyone's best interest for us to follow that and ask the applicant to provide the materials that are required by a special exception application.
I'd be inclined to agree with Maureen, and I'd be further inclined to want to continue our final review of the subdivision and site plan review and combine our ultimate decision with the special exception review, which I think we can probably plan to do in the next month or two. Looking at the applicant, they think that they can file something that we can get eyes on by March.
Yes, certainly. I think depending on the board's agendas upcoming, we'd certainly be motivated to turn around as soon as possible.
Yeah,
would be the idea. So if it would be sooner than March, that would certainly be in our best interest, I think. But so in going along with that, I think we can certainly put together something for the special exception. We'll review that with staff. Certainly there's overlap, so a lot of the same information in some areas probably, just to kind of resubmit. Happy to get that along. I think that's kind of where I left it. I think the only item, it sounds like the board wants to wait for final vote for subdivision site, and that wasn't sure if there was any other discussion the board wanted to have perhaps on the waiver. I just want to make sure that we've at least kind of cover most of the other items too, just going into a final meeting with you all.
Not just the waiver, but the financial ability letter as well.
Sure.
Can I just add a few things? So special exceptions, there's a lot of overlap already with what's required for site plan. So really, I believe the only things you would be looking for would be whether it meets those conclusions of law in section 60-1336 in regards to neighborhood character, traffic, that it meets all the specific requirements for special exception, that it's not going to alter the character of the neighborhood. A lot of these would be addressed in site plan. The second thing is that this project got preliminary approval at the last meeting. It's here for final plan, a public hearing. So there is a timeline. If the board is not going to agree to vote on the final plan tonight, there has to be a reason as to why and what else needs to be submitted. And the applicant has to agree to that timeline if you do extend the timeline. So just want to reiterate that.
Well, let me ask the applicant if he's going to have any objection to us continuing our review of the site plan and subdivision review applications along with the, while we wait for the special exception.
I think as far as, our goal to get, all approvals in hand, I think if we're not able to and we need to get approval for the special exception, I don't think that there's much else we can take exception to from you all. I don't know if there's any approval with condition that we return for special exception or something that we could do. I would certainly appreciate, your votes on the site and subdivision aspects, but I can understand that if we still need a separate vote, we need to return to you, that might need to be the case too, so.
Well, I would prefer that we take it all up at once and make our determination. If the special exception review requires a public hearing, comments will be limited at that public hearing to what is the special exception review criteria. We won't be delving into subdivision or site plan.
Sure.
To the extent that there's overlap, there's overlap. We can't really address that. But I think otherwise, you're also then subjected to the possibility of various appeal periods running. You might have one that runs starting tonight, one that starts running in 30 days, so you're not going to have your final approvals, so to speak.
Sure, right, tied to the special exception, yep.
And I don't know what restrictions we're under. It seems to me if we continue a hearing, we continue a hearing. I don't know. Planning department may be right about that, but with the applicant's consent, I'm going to urge that we continue this review until we reconvene to review the site, the special exception.
Yeah, you would have to agree upon, you'd have to agree upon a timeline for if you're going to continue this beyond the public hearing tonight. I would also suggest if the board feels that there is sufficient information provided for that waiver request from the building width, that the board act on that tonight to move that waiver forward.
Would determining like a date certain be the suffice as setting a timeline? If we were to continue the review to a date certain of next, I don't know what the agenda of next month looks like, but if we were to be able to determine a date, would that appease the requirement?
Yes, yeah, you can continue it to the February meeting, but that date has to be agreed upon by both the board and the applicant.
I would recommend that you handle all three of the criteria as you'll have the benefit of a public hearing on the special exception criteria. When you vote on site plan, subdivision, and special exception criteria on the same night potentially at that February meeting. And hopefully the applicant is open to that happening at the next meeting or at the March meeting if they need more time to put that together.
Are we comfortable in voting on the waiver tonight?
I mean, I do have some discussion points around the waiver that I'd like to bring up to the board. I have three numbers written down in front of me. I have 110 feet, 180 feet, and 276 feet. 110 feet is what they're allowed under the ordinance, or 60%, which would be 180 feet. I can understand an argument for something near 180 feet, or maybe even a little bit bigger than that, but we're talking about exceeding the allowable width by over 90 feet. And that's assuming we take the 60% number. If we look at the form-based code for this zone, it's characterized by small to medium-sized buildings. This seems like it's kind of an excessive waiver request based on the character of the neighborhood.
I guess just as a thought, with respect to the building and the width, there's been some concern about just having one entrance access point that, you know, if we're not to grant the waiver and we had to pull back the frontage, would that allow for, you know, a second access point? And I guess, you know, along with that too is, of course, that has a big impact upon, again, the finances of this whole project. So, so I guess some discussion along the need for a second access point, and I think that's probably one reason for, you know, some restriction on the use of the full frontage.
And when you're discussing access, you mean access as a means of like vehicular access into the property?
Exactly. Yep. Instead of putting all the traffic through the one entrance onto Main Street, could there be an access point off Academy?
I think there certainly could have been. I don't know that there's anything in the ordinance that restricts having 2 points of access into the property. I think for the size of the development being 53 units, one two-way access point in and out of the property is certainly sufficient. And it being I think between Main Street and Academy Street, we've done our traffic analysis, understand that there's no capacity issues at our start driveway or at Main and Academy or Main and Elm to that extent. The only other difference I would say with that would be that just access conditions onto Academy, other than perhaps the very end, in the west end of that site, there is the grade change, which is hard and makes for kind of not necessarily inadequate, but not ideal access conditions just with that amount of grade.
Yeah, and I certainly wouldn't presume to tell the applicant how they should design their traffic, especially not when we're talking about the waiver, which is, you know, a very limited scope here. I guess my concern is that if we go by the 110 feet, we're exceeding it by 166 feet, and if we go by 180 feet or 60%, we're exceeding it by 96 feet, which seems wildly out of character with a neighborhood that is small and medium-sized homes. I think that's my only point, not speaking to access, parking, traffic, but just looking at it in relation to the building design and the characteristics of the T-4.2 location.
I can understand concern about the bulk or size of this building, but the building across the street, where the old school building is a pretty big building. The Roque Block is not far away, and it's probably bigger than this building. I agree entirely that the form-based code uses words like small and medium-sized buildings, and that I have a hard time reconciling those words with what I see on the screen. But what I see surrounding the property is at least a couple of buildings of a similar bulk and size. And I think the granting of a waiver, we are to consider it in light of whether it meets the requirement or the objectives of the site plan section of the ordinance. And other than the provision that says protection of environment features on the site and adjacent areas, there's really not much there about size and bulk of the building. There's another section that I haven't been able to find yet about the purpose of the form-based code also being consulted when we decide whether to grant a waiver. I don't know whether we need to address this issue tonight, separate from the approval, the global approval. If other board members feel differently or think differently, can explain if we need to do so tonight, then I'm all on board.
If the board doesn't grant the waiver tonight, it means they'll have to come back and meet that standard and do a different design.
What?
Well, I think that you could make that decision as part of the overall project review. I think it's helpful for the applicant to have an answer now, but I don't think it's needed.
Okay. I'm certainly prepared to move forward if it's going to be helpful to the overall process, and if the board members are prepared to act on this.
I think anything we etch from the stone is going to be helpful.
Okay.
I'm comfortable as well, and actually I'm in favor of the waiver. I think there's, again, kind of, and we're going through a comprehensive plan effort now, I think we are realizing that the application of form-based coding has been a difficult process. And I think that, where we've used it, it's a question whether we used it appropriately in certain areas. And this might be another example that, right now we've got the 4.2, maybe it should be under a different form-based code. So I think that, we're learning, and I think this all is going to go into the new planning, and there may be some adjustments. But I agree, I think this is truly part of the urban center of Auburn. And, we have a theater across the street. And we want to, highlight that theater. It's in walking distance of our true downtown. So I think that this is an area that we do look for increased density and to make it more of a walkable downtown. So for that reason, I'm in favor of the waiver.
Let's see if we can get a motion on the floor on the waiver. There's a proposed motion in our file. If anybody would care to track that, either to approve or deny.
Excuse me. I make a motion to approve the proposed waiver request from section 60-549-1, building front setback, building width, and section 60-549-2, building frontage based on the written responses from the applicant and the submission dated November 4th, 2025.
I'll second that.
Motion by Riley, seconded by Bob. Discussion? No discussion. All in favor of the motion? All opposed? Motion passes 6-1. The Oz behind the curtain wants me to say who voted no. Maureen. There we go. All right. Entertain a motion as to how we dispose of the rest of the matters in front of us tonight.
make a motion to table approval to a date certain of next month's planning board meeting as we conduct a special exception review for the application.
Second.
Seconded?
Just
Maureen?
a quick question. Are we tabling or are we continuing?
What's the difference?
I think if we're tabling it, it has to be renoticed.
If we do something to a date certain, we don't need to renotice.
I think it's best if you postpone your decision and continue the public hearing to the date certain, rather than a tabling.
So, although we've closed the public hearing, we can, by consensus of the board, agree to reopen the public hearing?
I think
Continue
as,
the public hearing?
as part of the special exception review, I think you should accept comments on that part of the application as a continuation of a public hearing or a reopening at the next meeting.
And the reason that I asked my question is because Sam had suggested that we have to act within 30 days of the close of the public hearing. So if we don't close the public hearing, we reopen this public hearing to be continued to a date certain, then we're not under any pressure to do something within the 30 days because we've inadvertently closed the public hearing tonight.
I think that's accurate. I also think we can check with the applicant to make sure they're not intending to challenge that. I think they're here. They want a complete review and a complete application. They seem to be willing to cooperate with that timeline.
That was my understanding, and is that a confirmation?
Yep, certainly.
Am I able to withdraw my,
Yes.
I would like to withdraw the motion and restate it as I make a motion to continue this public hearing to a date certain of the February planning board meeting, awaiting a special exception review.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to continue the public hearing to the date certain being our February 2026 meeting, at which time we will take up the special exception review application that will be submitted. Everyone understand? Any discussion? All those in favor? Unanimous? Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all.
I just want to, I'm eating crow. The updated deed was in the paperwork. I just missed it. Just putting that out there.
Thank you. No, that was very important. That should have been
No,
included.
it was
in
there.
that.
It's just in the mountain of the different versions. It's a piece of paper I missed.
Well, thanks, Maria. That was, thank you. That was a good point.
Everybody doing okay? Need to, you want to? Next matter is public hearing, LAWPCA 230 Penley Corner Road, PID 137-032. Application to cease operations of the composting facility on behalf of the Lewis and Auburn Clean Water Authority. This property is located in the Agricultural Resource Protection District. Submission serves to satisfy the condition of approval from the September 20 Planning Board meeting, which states, upon deactivation of the facility, a plan shall be provided to the City of Auburn that includes future use or demolition of the buildings and structures and disposal of any waste materials on site. We'll now hear from staff.
Yeah, so they're, the LAWPCA, Lewiston Auburn, they're closing their compost facility. This was, part of the plan from September 2020, which basically was brought before the board as a pilot project for an anaerobic digester. And there were several conditions on that plan, and one of the conditions, as stated, was that in the event that the compost facility closes, that it has to come back to the board for approval. So they have submitted a plan for deactivation concurrently with DEP. They propose to maintain all aspects of the site during closure, and they intend to sell the property to a prospective buyer who will be responsible for all future use, site maintenance, and obligations. They have financial capacity estimates, written memo demonstrating technical capacity, a detailed plan for the compost closure facility, and environmental monitoring and remediation measures.
I'm sorry, did any member of the board have a question for staff at this point? Go ahead, thank you.
Hi, I'm Paula Giron from LA Clean Water Authority. I don't really have anything to add to that other than this facility has not been in operation for about 6 years now. And we do still have an obligation to keep it insured, as well as do site inspections, snow removal, mowing, and the environmental monitoring, which does have a cost to which we don't really get much benefit for, which is why we're looking to close the property. Happy to answer any questions.
You've heard our discussion earlier tonight about financial capacity, and I'm just unclear if this property is being sold, and it sounds like there's a deal pending. Why do we care about your organization's financial capacity? Why aren't we more concerned about the entity that's taking it over?
We don't have a actual deal in place. We do have prospective buyers. So the building, I guess if I'm understanding you correctly, or maybe Eric, you can answer better. It's essentially mothballed at this point, so the building could continue to just depreciate while we take care of it. We don't have a current use for it. Land application of biosolids was banned years ago, which is why our composting facility shut down. So we essentially have a property that's not currently usable for any of our operations.
The summary that I was given, which I just read aloud, said that when you do decommission, that you would, provided the City of Auburn, that includes future uses or demolition of the buildings and structures. Are the buildings and structures being demolished?
No.
What's the future use?
So we don't have an agreement yet, so any future buyer would have to go through their own approval process, and they would have to work within DEP's requirements for environmental monitoring, as well as the deed restrictions that are in place. So we don't have an agreement with anyone currently, so I can't speak specifically to that.
Well, how can we approve a demolition plan that doesn't, a deactivation plan if it doesn't address the future use of the property or the demolition of the buildings and structures?
Eric, I don't know if you can help explain this. I'm not.
If they have questions, they can ask.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, to my understanding, my entity does not need it anymore, so we're simply looking to close the site and also relinquish our license with the DEP. If I can get you a better answer, I apologize. My boss could not be here tonight.
Can you tell me what closing the site means?
It means that we relinquish any responsibility to it. So it's already mothballed, it's not functioning. We're simply keeping it insured.
Who then becomes responsible for it if you wash your hands of it prior to there being a new owner?
So we would maintain responsibility until there's a new owner for everything we're currently doing. So there won't be any gap there.
So you're basically check marking a box and letting us know that it's shut down, we're done with it, we're just waiting for new buyer. We're jumping through the hoop that was given to us in 2020 by formally letting you know that.
Correct.
Is that basically the
Yes.
reason? Okay.
And essentially, you're agreeing to continue to be the steward of that property until there's a buyer.
That's correct. And having prospective buyers already, we would hope that would happen within the next few months.
Is actually from our city manager accepting the plan that you put together, essentially agreeing to that, and you've listed the monies involved to maintain it as is for a period of time at the cost you provided.
Correct.
I'm having trouble with the link between, if we, I don't even know if we're supposed to approve this or what we're supposed to do with it, but if we were to approve your decommissioning plan tonight, and this property is then sold to ABC Company, what obligations do they have to this board to do what you're saying you're gonna do?
I believe they would still have to get approval for what they're going to be doing. There's restrictions on the property.
But before they do that, they've got to, they're assuming responsibility for doing everything that you have in your,
Correct. That would be part of a sales agreement.
Staff, is this property deeded in a way that makes that clear to a prospective buyer?
I don't know if the deed makes that clear. I think the planning board's approval required that in order to decommission this facility, that they come back and see the board make this finding. I guess if we can't talk about the reuse or the demolition, I see Ed's point. Maybe there's a way to identify that as an outstanding issue, but acknowledge that other than that, the board would be comfortable and we can make sure that the buyer comes back to the board potentially before closing. I know they're trying to clear it so that there could be a purchase that happens, and then the new buyer would come back to this board for a site plan approval. The city is working with a potential buyer, and I don't know if I can disclose who that is tonight, but they are proposing a use that's allowed in the ag zone that would require them to come back here for site plan and special exception.
But to your knowledge, there's no deed restrictions or covenants that would convey that information to a prospective buyer that the property becomes their responsibility to continue what the current owner is doing until they change it. Is that correct?
As far as maintenance goes?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think that's in the deed, but I'm not sure.
I guess I would assume too that prospective buyer is not going to buy until they have an approved plan of operation to go forward.
Yeah, I think we might be starting to put the cart before the horse, and I might be responsible for that. Correct me if I'm wrong, staff. This step is necessary for them to relinquish ownership, for it to become possible for another owner to take over. Is that basically the reason for this meeting?
Because the planning board approval had a condition on it that they come back prior to that closure. Yeah, and I don't know if we're sort of stuck in sort of a catch-22 here if they can't close until they have the board's approval, but the owner may not want to disclose their use until they have a closing. We could work with them on that and see.
Let me put it this way. If that directive was not given back in 2020, would this even come before us?
It's really unusual. I haven't seen it on another project approval where in order to close the business or the approval that they have to come back to the board. I haven't seen that, but I think where it was quasi-public, it was a compost facility. I think originally there were a lot of public concerns from the neighborhood for operating a compost facility out there. For whatever reason, the board required that of this application, but I haven't seen it on other other approvals.
But if the board had not required this, this is something staff could handle from one end to the other, correct?
Yeah, we usually can't stop a use from ending, so.
Maureen?
And I just wanted to know, if you look at page 5 on the packet, it does list 3 deed restrictions: restrict residential development, prohibit installation of any new wells for groundwater extraction without consent from Maine DEP, and outline an area around the closed biofilter where excavation or disturbance of soils are prohibited without the consent from Maine DEP.
It would seem to me, too, that the city, Auburn, wanted to be sure to retain ownership of this property, because right now it's under the ownership of the authority, which is a Lewiston Auburn organization, correct?
Yes, we're quasi-municipal, so the city of Lewiston and then Auburn Water and Sewer District.
So essentially own the property together.
Essentially, yes, yep.
Yeah. So I could see why, you know, the city of Auburn wanted to be sure that the ownership would essentially come back for review, for reuse back to Auburn, and not be caught up being owned by 2 municipalities.
And maybe that was the motivation for it. I don't know what motivated that condition at that time.
Would there be, I know you didn't come here expecting it. Would there be any reason that you couldn't return to this board when the authority and the buyer have made their agreement to have us bless this decommissioning plan, but also we will meet the buyer and be satisfied that they can do it?
I'm not prepared to answer that right now, but I can get you an answer.
Will it gum up the works if we kick the can down the road till you have a buyer?
I can't completely answer that. I mean, we're at a point where we definitely do want to move on from the property, and I think that'll happen if it, takes another month or so, or, whatever you need us to do, or we'll do it.
Would you be prepared to continue to be responsible for everything required in this deactivation plan,
Yes, we're obligated to. Yep.
regardless of whether you own it or not? Because you're asking us.
No, that would be part of a sales agreement. Those responsibilities would be transferred.
Right, and we don't know who this entity is or what their track record is or anything of that nature, and I guess that, at least, I think that's what some of our.
Right.
concern here.
As Eric mentioned, probably the most prominent prospective buyer is working with the city of Auburn currently.
Kind of interesting. Even last night, we were trying to think of what would be the situation that this board may have to go into an executive session.
So I have a question. So I think earlier you mentioned something along the lines of like biosolid, ban on biosolid composting.
Yes.
Was that a city decision, a state decision?
That was a state decision.
Okay. Does that involve like different organisms and like composting? Is it PFAS?
That's
PFAS
correct.
related?
That's correct.
Okay.
I think
What's pleasure?
we could, you've identified some questions that the board still has, and if you wanted to, you could direct us to get answers to those before you make a decision.
I look at it this way, Ed. We don't know why this is here. This just seems to be a fiery hoop. No one really knows why. And if they weren't mandated to let us know, we'd be none the wiser, and city would be handling it anyway. I'm ready to make a motion and let this young lady's life get a little easier.
Do we need to open it up for public comment? It is a notice public hearing.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Want to make a motion, please, to go into public hearing?
Make a motion that we open the public hearing.
Second.
Maureen made the motion, and I think Tim beat Riley to the second. Anybody care to speak on this issue? You have 5 minutes to do so. Seeing no one, we'll close the public hearing with a motion.
Make a motion, we close the public hearing.
Second.
Motion by Maureen, second by Bob. All in favor? Okay. All right. Tim, you want to make a motion?
I make a motion to approve the application submitted by the Lewiston Auburn LAW PCA to cease operation of the city composting facility located at 230 Penley Corner Road, PID 137-032, based on the applicant submission letter and materials dated December 18, 2025.
Second.
Made a motion, and what was,
Bob?
Bob was the second. Any discussion on that motion? All in favor? Passes unanimously. This young lady has her life back. All right. I understand that our next item, under other business, staff requests that the planning board vote to initiate consideration of an amendment to chapter 60 has already happened. Did I understand
Yes.
that correctly?
That's correct. It was an oversight on our part with staff changes, so that change has already been initiated. This was back in October, I believe. So at this point, staff, we will be drafting changes to present to the board at the next meeting for a public hearing.
Well, Tim, thanks you very much for not bringing things to us that we don't need to be dealing with in the first place. Thank you. Public comment. Time when anybody wishes to speak on something not on our agenda may do so.
Stephen Beal, 575 Johnson Road. I attended the special meeting of last evening, which was more than a training session, but was an actual planning board meeting, and was very interested in a number of the comments and observations that were made. One of the things that came out of last night's session was the surprise, frankly, apparently on the part of several board members about the receipt of information about a pending application, which of course is directed to receiving information only at a public hearing and not doing any independent things like even doing a visual observation of the site, to the extent that perhaps you couldn't even drive by a site. I think that is perhaps a bit hyper-technical, and that certainly you ought not to have to alter a regular travel route. The problem with doing informal site reviews consists of people getting out of cars and inevitably meeting some neighbor who has some perspective on the proposed application, usually negative. That's to be avoided. But I think that it was a bit hyper-technical not to permit somebody to do a visual drive-by. There's a lot of difference between looking at a map, even an elevation map, and visual observation, physically observing a site. And I can think of at least one application within recent memory where if there had been a visual observation of the site by means of a site visit, that an application that was approved would almost certainly have been rejected. That brings up the subject of site visits. To my recollection, there's only been one site visit by this board in the last 4 years. That was very well conducted. Everyone behaved themselves. No one attempted to pilfer information from anybody else who was present on the site visit. There was staff there, members of the public, representative of the applicant, and the visit went very well. So I encourage the board to foster more site visits in the future as a means of developing information on the character of a site, whether they have ultimately come to one decision or another about an application. Having that kind of visual observation is very valuable. There used to be a lot more site visits than there have been in recent years, and I urge their restoration to the active 53-man roster for future site visits. The other topic that came up last night of interest was, to me at least, was the characterization of board functions as being quasi-judicial and legislative in nature, and two different functions of this board. And there was a careful discussion about the nature of the activities of the board when performing one or the other of those functions, but relatively little direction as to which activities of the board constitutive legislative functions and which constituted the quasi-judicial function. And it's, I think, a safe sort of a shorthand to say that the recommendations of this board to the city council for changes to the zoning map or a zoning ordinance, the text of an ordinance, those are legislative functions, whereas the actions of this board, where it is the final arbiter of the city's position on an application for site review, special exceptions, or subdivision, the three S's are your quasi-judicial functions, and those can be quickly kept in your heads when considering why are we here for any particular matter before you, with those features in mind. Thank you.
Any other matters to come before the board? Seeing none, I take a motion to adjourn. Yes.
Sorry. In terms of miscellaneous items, kind of the discussion that we had yesterday as well, I was talking to a board member about it, but just some sort of semblance, if this doesn't have to formalize today, but I know around this time last year, when I was new to the board, there was discussion of like creating a subcommittee to review the policies and procedures and to update some of the technical terms, other things around those in that nature. And so I just wanted to see if there was any interest in doing that. We don't have to do that today, obviously. We can wait till whenever, but I've definitely been keen on updating some of those.
So Maureen and I were appointed to that subcommittee along with the former chair, and we attended a couple of meetings. And I think with staff changes and all, and we didn't finish the job. Perhaps in February, once we elect our chair and vice chair, we can also add somebody to that committee, and we can revive that if it's of interest to the board to continue to do so. Anything else? Thank you very much. Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you.